$11 billion. That is what Operation Epic Fury is estimated to have cost American taxpayers in its first 6 days alone, according to figures briefed to Congress. Not 6 months, not 6 weeks, 6 days. Pentagon officials reportedly walked into a classified Senate briefing and dropped that number on the table, and the room went quiet. Here is what makes that silence terrifying. Hundreds of Patriot interceptors have already been fired, consuming a large share of what America produces in a year. The U.S. Army has been buying roughly 500 PAC-3 MSE interceptors annually and is pushing to expand that, but consumption in this conflict is measured in the high hundreds. The U.S. Army has been buying roughly 500 PAC-3 MSE interceptors annually and is pushing to expand that, but consumption in this conflict is measured in the high hundreds. A single THAAD round cost well over $10 million, and it often chases a target built from parts you could order on the internet for a fraction of that price. The nation with the most powerful military in human history is bleeding money at a rate its own factories were never designed to sustain. And the country benefiting most from every single interceptor fired has not launched a single missile, not deployed a single soldier. That is exactly what we are going to break down today. This is Hidden Economy. To understand what is really happening, you need to forget everything the headlines are telling you about interception rates and operational success. The story is not about whether missiles hit their targets. The story is about what it costs to make them hit and who runs out first. Iran entered this conflict with an arsenal of roughly 2,500 ballistic missiles and many more armed drones, according to intelligence assessments. In the opening phase, it launched waves of drones and missiles on a scale that forced the most expensive air defense operation in modern history. Let me walk you through the numbers that matter. A Shahed-type loitering munition, the backbone of Iran's swarm strategy, is estimated by multiple analysts to cost in the tens of thousands of dollars per unit, often cited around $20,000 to $50,000 depending on configuration. It uses a commercial-style engine, basic GPS navigation, and a warhead built from widely available components. To stop one, the U.S. and its partners often fire a Patriot PAC-3 interceptor with unit costs on the order of $4 million per round. That is a cost ratio easily in the dozens to one, and in some cases well over 100 to 1. For every dollar Iran spends attacking, the defender can end up spending tens or even hundreds of dollars defending. But it gets worse. When the threat is a ballistic missile instead of a drone, the numbers become almost absurd. Iran's short-range ballistic missiles are believed to cost in the low hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit. The THAAD interceptor that destroys them costs around $12 to $13 million. That is on the order of an 80 to 1 exchange rate, and every single one of those interceptors takes time and specialized capacity to manufacture. Here is a detail that almost never makes the evening news. Before this conflict, the United States produced about 96 THAAD interceptors per year. Ramp that up to 400 per year, but that expansion is planned over roughly 7 years, not 7 months. THAAD rounds in the early phases of the Iran war, with some estimates putting the number into the low hundreds. Missile defense experts were already warning of a gap in interceptor availability stretching into the late 2020s, even before this surge, and those warnings have only grown louder. From defense to offense, the Tomahawk is America's long arm, the weapon that lets the Navy strike from more than 1,000 miles away. Tomahawks. Each one takes on the order of 24 months from raw materials to delivery, due to the complexity of the system and the supply chain behind it. 400 Tomahawk missiles at targets in Iran and across the region, according to defense analysts and officials. Expended in just a few days of combat. At pre-war production rates, replacing that many missiles would take many years per year. But that surge requires new suppliers, new workers, and expanded facilities that are only now being put in place. worth of high-end interceptor production, a meaningful chunk of the cruise missile stockpile, and over $11 billion in direct costs. $900 million, and subsequent Pentagon tallies suggest the burn rate has only increased as operations expanded. The expense of keeping forces in theater. 2 carrier strike groups stationed in or near the Gulf region cost millions of dollars per day each just to operate before a single weapon is fired. The other half is playing out 6,000 miles to the east in a country that has not fired a single round. That of the United States, a figure that comes directly from U.S. Navy and congressional briefing materials. The Jiangnan shipyard in Shanghai alone is assessed to have more capacity than all major U.S. shipyards combined. The United States has turned out only a handful, while America's share sits near statistical noise, often cited around 0.1%. And here is the part that most people miss. Beijing's military-civil fusion strategy, the same workers, the same supply chains, and the same engineering systems that produce tankers and container ships also support the construction of warships. Submarines, making it the largest navy in the world by hull count, the U.S. Navy fields just under 300 battle force ships. Steady clip, while the United States produces Arleigh Burke-class destroyers at a slower annual rate. Or cruisers, each with over 100 vertical launch cells, while the American Zumwalt-class program was capped at 3 ships after severe cost growth. By 2030, some U.S. assessments project that the PLAN could field around 430 to 450 combat vessels, and those projections are increasingly seen as conservative, probably more dangerous, including the DF-26, often dubbed the carrier killer, with ranges exceeding 4,000 kilometers and the ability to threaten U.S. bases and ships across the Western Pacific. Intelligence reporting agree that this arsenal is expanding rapidly. Interceptors the United States would need to defend against them. So while America is firing interceptors into the sky over the Gulf, China is quietly stockpiling the weapons it would need for a future crisis in the Pacific. Generals and missiles, it is a story about your money. Net interest payments on that debt hit $270.3 billion in just the first 3 months of fiscal 2026, exceeding U.S. defense spending over the same period. Dollars for the full 2026 fiscal year, with cumulative interest costs in the coming decade measured in the tens of trillions. Every $1 billion spent on interceptors, carrier operations, and cruise missiles is layered on top of that pile. Expensive, your car loan more costly, and small business credit harder to get. 2026, even before the full impact of the Iran conflict on energy markets has been felt. For the past year, due to a mix of weather shocks, disease, and higher input costs. Other choke points, those grocery numbers will climb even higher. The war is in the desert, but the bill is on your kitchen table. Or that does not go toward infrastructure, education, healthcare, or paying down the debt that is already eating the federal budget alive. As to how many rounds of advanced munitions you can fire before the shelves go empty. Some interceptor types are sitting at roughly 25% of the level planners would like to have on hand for major contingencies. Korean Peninsula or somewhere else, the U.S. could enter that fight with magazines that are already partially depleted. Government documents and congressional testimony, and the production surge that everyone is counting on to fix this problem is still years away from delivering its full effect. Important figures in global strategy right now. First 7 months of a recent year, and among the largest 10% of vessels by tonnage, that share rises to 88% annually, including a huge share of the world's semiconductors. If those shipping lanes become contested, the supply chain disruption would dwarf anything we experienced during COVID. Depend on chips and components that move through that strait, and the Navy that is supposed to help keep it open is currently tied down in the Middle East, burning through interceptors at a pace measured in billions of dollars. It's built the most technologically sophisticated missile defense architecture in history. But that precision came at a price, not just in dollars, but in fragility. accounts for a tiny fraction of that, you have built a system that works perfectly right up until the moment you run out of ammunition.
On forced battle, it was to impose costs at ratios so lopsided that the defender's own industrial base would become the bottleneck, not defeat through firepower, but exhaustion through economics.
China does not need to provoke a crisis.
It's to build and wait. Every tomahawk fired at an Iranian radar site is a tomahawk that is not sitting in a Pacific Fleet magazine. Guam or Japan, every carrier steaming day consumed in the Arabian Sea is a day that carrier is not operating near Taiwan.
To demonstrate resolve in a theater that, from a long-term great power perspective, is secondary. Slows, and the United States gets a window to rebuild its stockpiles and refocus on the Pacific. While serious, remains manageable. This requires political choices that, so far, few major actors have been willing to make. Energy prices spike beyond anything seen in 2022. Semiconductor supply collapses, the financial shock cascades through every sector of the global economy, and the effects are measured not in quarters but in years. The pivot point is not a date on a calendar. It is a set of production numbers and inventory thresholds. It is the month when THAAD and Patriot stocks fall below the minimum levels needed for credible deterrence in two theaters at once, and the year when new production finally starts to catch up. Based on current expenditure rates and published ramp-up plans, that tension will define the rest of this decade. Between now and then, every interceptor fired, every cruise missile launched, every carrier day consumed in the Gulf pushes that threshold closer. The generals report tactical victories, the markets sit near all-time highs, and somewhere in a quiet office in the Pentagon, an analyst is staring at a spreadsheet that shows hundreds upon hundreds of interceptors fired in weeks from lines that were designed to build a fraction of that per year. That spreadsheet may be one of the most important documents in the world right now, and almost nobody is reading it. Wars are not won by the nation that fires the most expensive weapon. They are won by the nation that can keep building after the other side's factory goes quiet. And right now, the loudest sound in this story is not the explosion over a desert sky, but the relentless hum of shipyards and missile plants far from the battlefield. The second path is prolonged attrition. The conflict drags on for 12 to 18 months, production surges take years to materialize, and stockpiles for systems like Patriot and THAAD drop toward the minimum levels required for simultaneous coverage of the Middle East and the Pacific. By the late 2020s, the naval balance in the Western Pacific crosses a point where American planners can no longer assume clear superiority within the first island chain. Markets begin to price in that shift. Treasury yields rise. The dollar weakens at the margins. Your cost of imported goods, which is nearly everything in your home, goes up. The third path is the one nobody wants to say out loud, a simultaneous crisis. The Middle East still burning, and a confrontation in the Taiwan Strait triggered not by sudden aggression, but by Beijing's cold calculation that American arsenals are at their thinnest point in decades. In that scenario, the U.S. faces a two-front demand with a one-front industrial base.